Over the centuries, there have been a lot of things written about individuals that occupy the place of judgment over other individuals in all sorts of civilizations and cultures. And among those writings, you find a lot of things about judges and judgment within the Bible itself. For the time we have together on this occasion, I'd like to talk about a short chapter in the book of Psalms. Psalm 82 is only 8 verses long. It's not attributed to King David, but to Asaph, who was a contemporary of David. And I want to use those 8 verses really as a jumping off point for some things you find statement as far as statements of principles in the book of Proverbs. But to begin with, in these short 8 verses, Asaph is talking about what the judges of his day were doing. It begins this way. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. That's the way it's translated in quite a few English translations. The word Elohim shows up. It's translated as God in a lot of situations, but the Hebrew means those that are mighty. So here's that statement again with that kind of connotation. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the mighty. What does he say? Well, here's what they are doing, or what they were doing. Verse number 2, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? That's what they're doing. In fact, the statement's made in verse number 5, they do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. Now, while you can attribute verse 5 to that culture in general, it points back to those that are in charge of making decisions, being partial, not being just, being oblivious to principles. That's what they were doing. What should they have been doing? Verse number 3, defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and the needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. That's what they should be doing. That's not what they're doing. And it's an idea that seems to be embedded in that kind of position and that era of responsibility and authority that we're kind of above everyone else. The statement's made in verse number 7. You shall die like men and fall like those that are royalty, fall like those that are princes, a prince of the nation. You're going to die like everybody else. An authoritarian view that I will make the determination regardless of principles. Problematic situations in cultures arise in a judicial system that throws principle to the wind, that no longer views things as really being right or wrong. They're all circumstantial. The book of Proverbs has a lot of things that deal with this kind of concept. And I want to start with Proverbs chapter 17. In Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 23. A wicked man accepts a bribe behind the back to pervert the ways of justice. Judgments that are made, not necessarily made on what's right or what's wrong, but upon how I can benefit from whatever decision if I'm in that position of making judgment, whatever judgment I may make. Taking bribes, that's not necessarily something that's all in the past, and that's unfortunate. The very next chapter, chapter 18 of Proverbs, there's a statement I want to get to down in verse 5, but it's interesting the way that the chapter begins. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart, his own point of view, his own opinion. When the wicked comes, contempt comes also, and with dishonor comes reproach. Now, here's verse 5. It is not good to show partiality to the wicked, or to overthrow the righteous in judgment. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. It's not always the case that those who are in positions to judge others are necessarily the wisest or most knowledgeable or the least partial in the culture. So these statements, one in chapter 17, verse 23, one in chapter 18, verse number 5, deal with this kind of concept. If we continue just one chapter further, in chapter 19, verse 28, not just judgments, but others. A disreputable witness scorns justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Now, the last phrase, like the mouth of the wicked can't get enough of things that are wrong. They don't care about what's right. They don't care about what's true. They care about what feeds their own insatiable desire for their point of view. And that's tragic. And it's not something that's isolated to millennia ago or centuries ago. The same kind of mindset can and does, unfortunately, exist today. In chapter 21 of Proverbs, verse number 6 and verse number 7. Getting treasures by lying is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. The violence of the wicked will destroy them because they refuse to do justice. Here talking about a mindset in the populace, in the culture in general. And then it filters over to those in positions of authority. Let's take a look at one more. In chapter 28 of Proverbs, the statement that is made down in verse 5. Evil men do not understand justice. Unjust judges exist along with individuals that are just ordinary citizens of a particular culture that want their way regardless of facts, that don't stand on principles. Feelings rule the day. History, if it doesn't coincide with what they want history to say, they want to rewrite. And those that actually have a position of authority and a responsibility to culture sit at a judicial bench. If they recognize their limitations, that's one thing. If they refuse to look at precepts and principles, that's another. Problematic in every culture, unjust judges. Whether it is the nation of Israel back in the Old Testament or the world in which we live today. Just because somebody sits in judgment does not mean they're actually impartial. But it should. But that filters down into the way that we approach people around us. One of the plagues on culture is that of assumptions, or jumping to conclusions, or not looking at all the facts, or discounting certain things that I really don't want to agree with to begin with, and so there's a skewed view of what is really right and what's really wrong. It's not just a problem with those that sit in the courtroom as a judge, but the person down the street, or the person you see in the mirror. We need to be impartial in everything that we do. Interesting verses. Get a chance to go back and read Psalm chapter 82 again. Maybe look at these verses again in Proverbs. Whatever you do, please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.